Thank you so much, Dustin. Okay, hi everybody. Hi again for those of you who are joining us for the second part of our series here. We have a lot to cover. My name is Courtney. I own PDXPERT Medical Billing here in Portland, Oregon, and I work exclusively with Jane as our software. And so we decided, Jane and I decided that we should do this for the Jane community and kind of help to educate and answer those questions that we get a lot from the community all around the country, actually. So we thought this series would be helpful to just kind of walk through not just how to use Jane, but how to use it in the context of medical billing. So that's kind of where this comes from. Before I get into our next section, one of my favorite late night hosts does a digital series called Corrections, where he corrects things that have happened on the show over the past week. And I thought that would be a good place to start. There are a couple of things that I really wanted to revisit and just clarify. I was a little iffy the last session about the NPI2. You do have an NPI2 number for each practice location. So you wouldn't necessarily load two addresses under the same NPI2. You would have an NPI2 for each location. So I did want to just clarify that, since I was a little like, sometimes I get, oh, I got to check that information. So I just wanted to kind of come back around. There was a question concerning accept assignment versus accept assignment of benefits. Accept assignment means that the provider accepts the fee schedule provided by the insurance company. You're likely in network. You would choose yes if you are in network. You would choose no if you are out of network. Assignment of benefits is a letter signed by the patient that needs to be submitted to their insurance company, likely with the claims that you're submitting, that indicates that the payment can and should be made directly to the provider. So that was a question that came up last time. I said I'd come back around to it, and that's what we're doing. Finally, the signature on file. I just wanted to revisit that. We've had a couple of some feedback come back to us, so I just wanted to make sure that there was some clarity around that. Stating the patient's signature is on file indicates that payment can and should be made directly to the provider. It also authorizes the provider to release information that is needed to adjudicate the claim or allocate the payment. So, what gets adjusted off, what goes to patient responsibility, what gets paid by the insurance company. I want to just state this as kind of a general rule as we go through this series, that there are always exceptions to rules in medical billing. It's part of what makes the field very difficult. So it's good to know that, for instance, an exception to this rule is Medicare. Medicare requires that the patient's signature is on file. Medicare providers, whether they are participating or non-participating, if they are submitting claims, do need to have that checked, because they are subject to audit verification. So again, we're kind of here giving this general information to the community. It means that we're not getting into the specifics as much. So it's good to use this as a framework for knowledge, but also know that there are always exceptions to rules. There's always something more to know. It's always good to touch base with somebody has an expertise in the field to actually get that clarity around what needs to happen, what needs to go on the claim form for the insurers that you are working with in your region. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there right off the bat, make sure that that was very clear. Because yeah, there's always something. So it's good to keep in mind. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to get started here. The last time that we visited with each other, we went over the settings section, and we went over 4 different categories. We went over locations, we went over the billing settings, the insurers, and the billing codes. And that was kind of the setup of making sure that we have everything in the system that we need to be successful. I consider this to be the foundational work for successful U.S. insurance billing. So now we're going to actually move over to the staff category, because this is where we get kind of specific with the providers that we have in the clinic, because everybody's got different situations. We want to make sure that we are accommodating those situations. And like we really talked about a lot the last time, we want to make sure that information is matching in the system what's on the contract with the insurance company. So this is kind of furthering that effort. So we are in the staff category. We're going to pick one of our providers. Mark is here, who's a chiropractor. We are going to skip right on over to billing, the billing section, and that's kind of where we're going to live here in the staff section. Okay. So let's just take a quick gander at the whole screen here. We have our staff billing settings, pardon me, our default claim information and our insurance specific claim information. Each of these has their own function. We're going to go through it. Now, even though the system doesn't necessarily require you to have any ID numbers here up at the top, I do think it's a good idea to fill this out with all the information that you would have on a provider, the license number, EIN, TIN numbers. If you're not using the social security number for the provider, I don't think that's necessary. I dissuade providers from using their social security as a tax identification number. Certainly not a CPA, certainly don't have a right to go and tell people what to do in that regard, but I would definitely talk to a CPA and find out if that's the smartest option moving forward to use the social security number. So if it's not being used in the billing of the claims, I don't recommend putting it in here. Obviously, do with your business as you see fit. The NPI-1 number, if you have an NPI-2 number, you could put that in there. That's not going to be reflective of that individual. It's going to be reflective of the organization. So perhaps that's not as important here. But my point is the ID number area can be very helpful when having to make insurance phone calls. And the reason that I say that is when you get on with an insurance company, they are going to ask you for a lot of identifying information about your organization, who you are, and then of course about the patient that you're calling on. So if you are, for instance, in my position where I am not the provider, I am a third-party billing entity that's making this phone call, I need to have all this information right in front of me. So I need to have their NPI-1, I need to have their EIN number, perhaps even the taxonomy code, which is not in here, but that's okay. I'll show you where that goes. So my point being is it is helpful to have this filled out, even if it's not required for claim submissions, just because you have it as a reference. You can come back in and check that information. It's also a really good thing to have when you are setting up new employees in your clinic. This is kind of a good starting point to get to know them. I can't tell you how many clinic owners I've had say, oh, I found out that one of my providers doesn't have an NPI number. And, let's pretend for a moment that that was a massage therapist and the chiropractor is where the massage therapists are working under that license for their work. So you wouldn't necessarily be using that provider's rendering NPI number. So this is kind of a first setup, is to go through, get their staff account all set up, and that kind of gives you an idea as to what they have, what they don't have, and helps you to kind of get to know them. It's kind of a good first step in the onboarding process of new employees, in my opinion. So again, this is not necessary for claim submissions up here. However, I think it's a good idea to use it. So let's move on to the default claim information section. And I'm just gonna, I've got my notes off to the side in my other screen. I'm just gonna go over and make sure I'm on the right page. And we're gonna open this section up. Now, the default claim information is kind of what it sounds like. The information that we put in this section is gonna go on every single claim, unless you put insurance specific claim information. We're going to get there. So for now, let's go ahead and start with the default claim information section. We're going to view this section. Now, the rendering provider NPI, that's going to be obviously what it sounds like. That's your NPI number as the provider rendering those services. The taxonomy code, a taxonomy code refers to the specialty itself. So for instance, chiropractic has its own taxonomy code, acupuncture has its own taxonomy code, and so on and so forth. Some insurance companies will require that you have the rendering provider taxonomy code loaded in. Some are not as picky about that information. So that's kind of something that you would either learn about that company, or better yet, you would know from the contract when you signed up with that insurance company and became in network. So if you do see, denials or rejections that are coming back referring to the taxonomy code, this is one of the two places that it lives. One is the rendering provider taxonomy, and one is the billing provider taxonomy. If these two are different, you may find an insurance company wants them both. For instance, if the rendering provider is a massage therapist's taxonomy code, but the billing provider taxonomy code, the contract is set up as a chiropractic billing provider, then these two taxonomies would be different. It could be that you're working with an insurance company that wants to see each of those. So that's good to know what that is. Honestly, you could go on and just Google acupuncture taxonomy code and you would find it. I always say, make sure that you're getting it from a good source, you know, if it's a government source, if it's an educational source, but it's fairly easy to find. If you have to use the license number instead of the NPI, you have that option. I personally have not seen that situation, but that doesn't mean anything. It's out there. If it's an option, it's out there. So typically you would be using your rendering provider NPI. There is the chance that you need to use a license instead of an NPI, and that would be something that you would need to, you know, discover from that insurance company, or perhaps they told you up front, this is what you need to do, follow that instruction. The tax number, this is going to be either the EIN number for the organization, or it's going to be the social security number of that provider. Again, I would always recommend using an EIN number, establishing that EIN number with the business, so on and so forth. Again, that's not my field. That's definitely getting into the CPA lawyer field. So these are things that you would want to have a conversation with those professionals and find out what is best for you in your setup of your business if you haven't done that yet, or if you're questioning what you should be doing. So this is going to be likely for the organization if it's a clinic, or if it's just a solo provider, it could be their EIN number or their social security number, whichever they are using for their claims. And remember, this is the default claim information. So this is going on everything right now. So just kind of bringing that around. Again, billing provider taxonomy code. It's some insurance companies are going to require that. Oh, somebody's chiming in. Is that on purpose? Somebody needs something? Nope. Okay. Just checking. All right. Actually, this is a good opportunity. I'll quickly check the Q&A here. Okay. Jennifer, I see your question. I'm going to let Jane start with answering that question, and we will come back around. I won't share it right now just because it seems like something Jane might be able to answer for you, but we will come back around if the Jane team wants me to address that question. So, okay, coming back, billing provider taxonomy code, rendering taxonomy code, get those in there if they're required. If they're not, fantastic. Don't have to worry about that. Billing provider NPI number. So this is this goes into box 33A, and this, again, like we just keep talking about it. We keep talking about it. This is dependent upon how your insurance contracts are set up. So if you have your organization registered with an insurance company under, let's say, your EIN number and your NPI2, the organization's NPI number, that's what needs to go in box 33A. If you have it under your rendering, let's say that you set up a contract and it's just your contract, it's your EIN or SOC, and it's your rendering NPI number. If the insurance company allows that, some require the NPI2. If they're saying NPI1 is great, then you already have, hopefully you already have that loaded in, but you would put that in here and then select which one it is. So either NPI1 type 1 or NPI2 type 2. But it is important, again, to know what's on the contract so that you're putting the right thing in. And, you know, if you're in a position where you're like, gosh, I contracted a long time ago, I'm just using Jane for the first time, I'm not sure how to even check what information was there, I don't remember, you can always do a tester claim. I'm not saying that's the greatest thing to do. It may be more prudent for you to reach out to the insurance company and find out what your contract looks like, but you could send the claim out with your, let's say, NPI1, track that claim, and usually it will reject immediately in the clearinghouse if the billing IDs are incorrect. Not all of them do that, but a lot of them do. So you would have a rejection pretty quickly, come back and say, hey, this is not a billing provider that we recognize. There's a good chance that it comes down to this ID. So good to know what's on those contracts so you can get it in here. NPI1 is well, I won't say that. We'll just say it's a good idea to know your contracts and make sure that the information in here reflects what's on your contracts. Okay, staff member. Now this is for, let's say that you are an organization with a business name, but your insurance companies want your name in box 33, which is the billing provider section of the claim form, bottom right section of that claim form. You would come in, you would put the name in, if it's me, it would be Cortney. And if this is what the contract is set up as, I would want to make sure that this is correct, because if they see the billing, if they see the business name in that box, they may reject the claim because it doesn't exactly fit what's on that contract. So this is the opportunity to put different information. And when we get to the insurance specific claim information, we're going to get a little bit more into this because this is where that information becomes really helpful. So we're going to get rid of those. Billing provider address, same story. If you need to change the billing provider address, that's where you would do it. And then finally, we're going to end up here, box 31, rendering provider first name and last name. This is for situations such as locum tenens situations, where you have a physician who is out of the office on vacation, or they are sick and they have a covering physician of the same license, and you are using a locum tenens situation. So a locum tenens is when you have a physician covering another, they work under the contract and the name of that original physician, the one that has the contract with the insurance company, and then you would add appropriate modifiers into the claim to indicate that it is a locum tenens situation. This is a nice way of handling that, because then you don't have to change each claim. You can do that if you want to, but let's say that the covering physician is just coming in, doing this, covering for this physician, and then they're on their way. It's best to just set the account up so that you would have the physician that they are covering, their name in here, so that the claims are actually coming through under that name, and then that modifier is what indicates that it's actually a covering physician, not the original physician. It's a little bit confusing, I apologize for that, but this is the best way of handling that, because then you don't have to look at each claim and change it on each claim. It can just be the default for that physician's work. Another situation that may occur where this is relevant is if you are a supervising physician, you have interns, you have residents, those types of situations. This is appropriate to go ahead and fill their accounts out like this, and then you would have double signatures on those charts so that you'd have the supervising physician and then the one that's rendering the service. I'm going to stop here real quick and just talk a little bit more about billing under a different name or a different rendering provider. This is something that a lot of clinics like to do. There's a situation I encounter a lot, and that is I have a provider that's entering my organization. They are not yet credentialed, and therefore I'm going to have them bill under my license while we work on getting them credentialed. And once they are credentialed, they will bill under their own information. I highly recommend that you look into the federal regulations around that situation, because you could be doing something that is not quite up to par. We'll just say it the nice way. It might not be exactly what you want to do. You need to be careful with that situation. There are some situations, like we talked about, locum tenens, supervising physician, where it's perfectly fine to bill under a different physician's license. And those situations are limited. So let's just say that it's a good idea for you to look into whether that's something that you are legally able to do before doing it, just in case you do get into an audit situation. You certainly don't want to be caught doing something that you shouldn't be doing. So we'll leave it there. Just looking through my notes, making sure that I got everything here. All right. Perfect. Okay. And let me just check back in on my Q&A, and we're doing good. Okay, perfect. So again, default claim information goes on all the claims. If you have specific insurance companies that want different information that differ from the default claim information, that's when you would go down and use this insurance specific claim information section. I'm just gonna get over there. Perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this. Let's view this. This is the same window with the exception of the fact that you would be, actually, so sorry, we're gonna add new, not view, is you would be putting this to a specific insurance company. So let's say that we are working with Aetna, and Aetna says, yep, I want your rendering, I want your tax ID, this is an EIN, but we want you to bill under the under your first and last name, not under the business name, which is loaded in the settings section. So we would say, oh, okay, we need to make sure that when we're working with this insurer, we are using this specific information because it does differ. You might find this situation, especially multidisciplinary clinics that work with, let's say, ASH or Optum. Sometimes those companies don't allow for group contracts. They only allow for individual contracts. And even though each individual contract has the same EIN number on it, so it is under the same organization, the contract itself is under the rendering provider's NPI and likely wants to be under that rendering provider's name as opposed to the business name. So this is just a situation that can occur. This is a great way of accommodating that situation so that you don't have to again, check all of your claims and make sure that things are right. This is the way that you solve that problem. So if we were doing that for Aetna, we would go ahead and put our name in here. And then this is what populates at the box in box 33 instead of the business name. So let's pretend like that's something that Aetna requires. This is our way of handling that situation so that all the claims are always going out right when it goes to Aetna. And we can see we already put an entry into Blue Cross Blue Shield. Again, perhaps that contract just looks different, is just set up differently than all of your other contracts. Maybe you're working with an insurer who doesn't allow for group contracts under a certain specialty, but they do allow for individual contracts. So those are some of the situations that might occur and why the insurance specific claim information section is so important to be able to accommodate all of those different situations that may occur. Okay. You want to do this with every single staff member. Like I had mentioned, I think that it's a really good idea to actually use this as a starting off point. Go through the whole, the whole staff account with your new hire. So you just hired a new provider, and maybe you would go through and make sure that all of this is not only correct for the provider, but that it's filled out in such a way that can be helpful to making insurance calls or checking information. And then of course you could get into the charts and the template and do all of that. We're not going to quite get into that level of depth. We're going to kind of keep it to the US insurance billing stuff, but this is a good section just to go all the way through with a new hire as an introduction to Jane and get them set up correctly, and then kind of go through and do a training with them to get them familiar with the software and what their job responsibilities are. So, all right, that is the staff section. Let me just get my notes here. Come on, little mouse. There we go. Okay, and claims. So we are now going to go over to the schedule. Now, when I was putting this together, I split the claims process in two because it is there's a lot to it. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to cover. So I wanted to kind of start with how do you set that claim up right from the beginning? And that happens in the schedule. So, pardon me, we are going to I'm just going to kind of squeeze in here and I'm going to create a new appointment that we can work with. So when you are, usually if a patient is walking in the door, they've already been scheduled. So we're doing something a little bit differently. I don't want to use one of these because I'd like to kind of set it up right from the beginning. We'll see how successful I am. I might have to jump into one of these. But let's say we're setting that appointment for the person who just walked in, and then we are going to go ahead and arrive them and continue with that process. So we've got over here, we have the appointment started. We're going to select a treatment. Let's go ahead and do a subsequent treatment. Oh, geez, who do we have? Do we have no? Okay, let's just do one of our tester patients. Tester patient. Okay, perfect. And then we are going to just make sure that we have, I'm going to go with none just right now because I want it to be as blank as possible before I actually continue. So I'm going to go ahead and book that appointment. Perfect. Okay, so now we have our tester patient, and we are going to arrive our tester patient. This is the first important step to making sure that you are going to create an invoice. The reason that it is so important to make sure that you're going to create that invoice is because it is so easy to lose track of it if you don't arrive the patient and add the insurance policy. And the reason for that is because those two steps move that invoice into the draft category or the unsubmitted category in the billing section under claim submissions. We'll get there. And so we want to make sure those two things occur so that we don't lose track of this. We don't forget to bill it. It's in the claims list. It's ready. So this is your first most important step, is to arrive that patient. Then you can start altering the things that we've got below. So, okay, let me just get into my thing here. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to go down to the billing info. We're going to go down to the insurance info and add that policy right away. Just because, like I said, as soon as the policy is in there, it's going to move into the draft or the unsubmitted category, whichever you have defaulted. So we want to make sure that happens so we don't lose track of this appointment. As you can see, we have two options here. We can either add the policy itself, which will just pull the insurance policy from the patient's account, and that's it. Or we can copy a previous appointment forward to get those codes. Now, as you can see, it's actually from today. So we're actually not going to choose that option. But the difference between these two options is important. One, I recommend to my clients to pull the policy alone in the beginning of the year so that the policies can reset. And the reason I recommend that is because a lot of my clients choose to reset their insurance policies in their patient's account in the beginning of the year in January. Most plans, not all, obviously, are calendar year plans, so they reset in January. Deductibles, all the things start over, and so they are going to pull the correct policy. It's not necessarily a downside, but something that you should be aware of if you are copying from a previous appointment is it will pull everything from that previous appointment, and that includes mistakes. So if there is an ICD code on that previous appointment that is no longer a billable code, it will pull it forward even if Jane doesn't give you the option to choose that code in real time. It will also pull the policy from that last appointment. So let's say that you have a patient who had Aetna last year, and this year they have Blue Cross Blue Shield. If you're pulling from the last appointment that was last year, you're going to be pulling an old insurance policy forward instead of the new one. Again, you would only see the new one here, assuming the old one has been closed. If the old one's been closed, you actually can't have it come up as an option. But if you're pulling forward from a previous appointment, it is an option. So those two things are important to know. Is it better for your clinic? And it's going to vary from person to person, from clinic to clinic. Is it better for you to just choose the insurance policy and not pull anything forward other than pulling the policy from the patient's account? Or are you doing consistent work on the same diagnosis code, same services? You know that policy is right. It's the middle of the year, whatever the case may be. Is it easier for your team to pull that forward and just populate the whole thing? And that is everybody's individual choice, and that is going to be dependent upon the workflow in that office, what works best for that office. So I just kind of wanted to explain those two a little bit further. There are benefits to just pulling the policy. There are benefits to pulling from the old one. It's good to know what those are. So once we have the insurance policy in here and we have arrived the patient, this has now moved into the draft category, which is so nice because, or it's actually an unsubmitted. You can see right here under the primary policy, it tells you what folder it's sitting in. It's sitting in unsubmitted. So this is nice because even if the codes aren't loaded in, or nothing else is done here, we see that it's there. We see that it happened, and we know, oh, okay, we got to get some codes in there. We got to bill this claim. So it makes it so that it can be tracked, Without this, it's uninvoiced and it's very easy to lose track of. There's a way to find it, but this is the way to go. Arrive, add that policy right away. Okay, I think I've made that clear enough. Now, the rest of this can be very helpful. The booking information, if there is money owing on the account by the patient, if they have balances from the past, that's going to show up. So you know, okay, maybe I want to look at this patient's account, find out what they owe, and collect at that time of service. Or if there's a credit, you know, okay, well, usually this patient would have a copay, but they have a credit right now. I'm going to go ahead and use that credit instead of charging them today for their visit. So there's a lot of things that you can kind of glean from this area. And then of course it does give you the option to actually click in, view, go to the patient's account, look at that patient's account. If you're unsure of any information that you might need or are finding, it's a good thing to go in, and you can actually just click right here and it opens it right up. So you don't even have to move over. And then you can go through and get whatever you need. And we're going to just head right back. Okay, let's go down to the notes section. Now, the notes section is kind of one of those places where I'm sure it gets overlooked a lot. I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why I like the notes section. I like the notes section because it's a great place to put basic verification of benefit information, copay information, co-insurance information. If there's a deductible, are some of the services that you are going to be performing going to be paid for out of pocket by that patient as opposed to going to insurance. And I have a little bit of a cheat here. We're going to, when we get to the end of today's session, we're going to touch on how can the provider also know that information, which is important while they're doing their charting. So I find the note section to be very valuable. It can also be, you can also turn a note into a task. So if I'm a biller and I'm doing work and I'm like, oh, we don't have the insurance card on file and I need to look at the insurance card, I can say, please get the insurance card from patient. And then I would turn it into a task and I would assign it to a staff member. And then I actually recommend putting the due date either for that day, if you would like, or today's date, because then it's going to, now because I'm in demo owner and I'm not in Marcus Gregory, it doesn't show it. But if I were in Marcus Gregory's account here, it would actually come up with a little kind of a one. It would show me kind of an alert type of fashion or a badge type of fashion that I have a task that is due. So it kind of tell me when I'm getting into my account, oh, I got something I got to do. Let me check it. Okay, great. It has to do with this patient. When the patient comes in, hey, can I have your insurance card? Can I get that copied? So it's really handy to have this. It's good for whoever is booking, whoever's on the front desk to check those notes and see if there's anything that's needed. And what's nice, I should have kept that open, is that when I completed that task, I could just click the little check mark and it disappears. Now I don't know that it disappears from the notes section. I think it actually just disappears from the tasks. I'm sure that Jane could let you know. I apologize for not knowing that up front. Some things that I just don't follow up on sometimes. So, so that's the notes section. We're going to come back to how that can be valuable to the providers while they're doing their charts. But right now we're going to move on to the billing information section. This is a great section. Again, just kind of as an overview. Am I looking at the right policy? Is there something in my mind that's going, wait a minute, isn't this supposed to be Blue Cross? And maybe I would look into that and see if it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's a good opportunity to kind of double check all of these pieces. What is going to the patient? What is going to the insurance company? So on and so forth. Once we go down to the insurance info, this is where the billing codes can be added. And this is kind of our first, well, it's not our first stop as far as options are concerned. But this is, again, a very personal choice, depending on the provider, depending on the clinic. You can have your front desk add billing codes. I have providers who run, you know, a treatment card up front that says I did a 98940, I did a 97140, and they would add that in, and then they would have the services that were rendered that day. Perhaps they have the allowed amounts from that day, and they're able to do a calculation for the patient and get them to pay at the time of service. You know, whatever that may be, that is an option. The other option is to leave this section be and when the provider is charting using the update billing codes. Now we are going to get to that. I know I say that a lot. I apologize. There's just a lot of information. I want to make sure it comes at the right time. But instead of entering codes right up front, especially for busy clinics that don't always get the codes from the provider, it can be valuable instead to have the provider actually chart those codes and have it transferred right to the invoice. So we're going to get there. Again, this is a personal choice, but you could just add in your codes here, and then you would have services rendered. Now, you don't have to necessarily worry about diagnosis codes here or modifiers. You could if you really wanted to, but this can be taken care of later, and we will go over how to review claims before submission later in this series. So you could go ahead and put these in here to be able to collect from the patient. Now, something that I hear a lot is, well, we don't have the policy, we don't have like these fields filled out in the patient's policy section for whatever reason. There are a lot of reasons why a provider wouldn't do that or a clinic wouldn't do that. This is an opportunity to say, but I would like to collect, $20 from this patient up front. One, you could put that in the patient's policy, so there's always a $20 balance showing on that date of service. If for whatever reason that doesn't work for your workflow, and there are a lot of reasons why it might not. It could be that you have co-pays for some codes, co-insurance for other codes, a per diem. I mean, there's a lot of situations out there. So what I recommend is, if you're like, I just want to create a small balance to basically take, what we'll call a deposit from the patient until the claim is processed, you can always enter that into this field. So that's kind of what I suggest, is just at this, okay, we want to collect $20. I'm going to just put $20 in there. And then you would see that the patient's responsibility has moved to $20, and you're able to actually take that payment. You can go up here, pay, take that payment, apply that payment, and then allow insurance to process that claim and come back to the patient payment at the right time. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to collect from patients up front. And this is an easy way of doing that without having to fill out that section in the policy. Again, a lot of reasons why a provider wouldn't do that. So, and a lot of reasons why you would. So I'm trying to kind of accommodate everybody as much as I can. Okay, so that's that first policy. We've got the codes in there. We're deciding to take a $20 copay. Let's say for just a moment, because I do see this often, secondary policies are often confusing. There's a lot of confusion around secondary policies, but I will say this: if you have a patient with a secondary policy, your best bet is to add it right now. Now, this is the same policy, so I can actually, we'll just add a new one. We'll just make it good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're going to save that. And that's going to populate as the secondary policy. Now, there are a lot of reasons why we want to do this right from the beginning. One, we always want to know the whole story when we look at that invoice. And if the secondary policy is missing, it looks like there's no secondary policy present. Secondly, when we want those claims to go out and the first claim, primary claim, goes out and then gets responded to, you want the secondary policy already attached to that invoice so that the payments get passed to the secondary payer instead of to the patient or leaving outstanding or whatever the case may be. So the point here is that whatever the patient's situation is, you want this all to reflect that situation right off the bat. Just make it real easy. And we're going to get into where do these claims go and how do they move around when the primary processes and the secondary is ready to be sent. We are going to get to that in the second part of our claims submissions webinar. So we want to make sure this is all complete, ready to go. We got our primary policy. We've got our secondary policy. We have that $20 that the patient owes. But if you notice now that we've added a secondary policy, it's no longer asking for that $20 because it is going to assume that everything needs to process through both insurances before we know what the patient is going to owe. So a lot of situations, there's a lot of weeds we could get into. We're going to keep moving. All right. And then I like the very bottom of this window only for informational purposes. I love that it has kind of a little summary of what has happened and the history. If you have no shows, they could show up. You see that there are upcoming appointments, things like that. These are just good. This is just good information for your front desk to have in case you're like, okay, the next time this person comes in, I need to get this information from them. I see they already have an appointment. I'm going to go to that appointment. I'm going to make a note in that appointment, or I'm going to make it a note in the profile and set that task and set that due date for that next time that they come in. So there's a lot of information to glean from this area. I realize that oftentimes the front desk of an office is one of the busiest places. And there are days where you can't get anything done because the phone is ringing and questions are happening. And there's a last minute person in a lot of pain coming in. And I mean, I've been there. I run a chiropractic clinic in the past. I know what happens. I know that it can be difficult to get to all of these things. That's why I recommend at the end of every business day to have somebody just go through your appointments for that day and make sure that they're correct. And the most important thing is to make sure that they were arrived and that the policy has been added. That way you don't lose track of it. That way you don't have to go back through schedules later to make sure everything is there or pull the report for uninvoiced. All the things. Just make sure that it's at the end of the day, everything is in there. However you choose to put that information in, and then you will know, okay, we have a plan. We know what to do with this. Okay. Ooh, let's just take a quick gander at our chat, make sure that I haven't missed any questions. Thank you for your patience. All right. Yes. John, thank you so much for pointing that out. I did notice that out of the corner of my eye that this 98940 code does not have a price attached. And I do have providers who have run into that problem. There was a point in time that the practice didn't have a price attached to a code. Then the price got attached. Somehow codes got pulled forward. Somehow the wrong code got chosen, and it didn't attach a price to it. That's a good thing to keep an eye out for, because obviously we want to charge for the services that we are billing for. So it would be a good moment to look at that and say, oh, not only do I need to find the one that has the price, but maybe I even need to go into settings and look for that code and, archive the code, delete the code, whatever, or just attach the price to that code so this can't happen again. In the review of all this information, it is your first and best opportunity to go through and make sure that everything is correct, everything looks good, before moving on to, your next task at hand. So thank you for that, John. I'm going to just wander back over to my notes here and just make sure that I've hit all of the points that I wanted to hit. Perfect. Did that. Okay. All right, guys, we are moving right along. Things are going really well. We're going to go through, appointment is done. Okay. We are going to go over, we're going to touch, I'm going to just exit out of this window now, and then we're back to the schedule. I'm going to touch on charting for the provider and how can they use the appointment and the notes section the notes section appropriately during their charting. I want to give a little bit of foundation for this, because perhaps not everybody has a situation like this. I have several clients who have like I'd mentioned before, patients that pay for certain services out of pocket. Let's say that, electric stim is not covered by their insurance. Ultrasound is not covered by their insurance. Certain PT codes, massage, lots of stuff, right? What we recommend is actually creating an invoice for those services as products. That way the patient can pay for them out of pocket. It does not get sent to insurance, those type of things. The conflict with that is that the provider often does not know what's covered, what's not covered, and they are doing their due diligence by filling out the chart completely with all of the codes and all of the services rendered. And if they are indeed using that bottom section of the chart note, update billing code section, where it moves those codes to the invoice, we have found that there's a conflict because the provider, again, doesn't know that some of those codes shouldn't be sent to insurance. So the solution that I came up with for my clients was when you are doing your chart notes, you have the option to look at your day. This is just narrowing it down to today's date. This is narrowing it down to your schedule. So these are the patients that I saw today or I am seeing today. And so when I'm doing my chart notes, I am able to actually hover over each appointment, and let's find one that actually has some watch. I have one that has, okay, here's one note that has back pain. So let's actually go up and choose our Richard Ryan suggestion or client here. We're going to go to the profile. I'm going to say, and this is the advice I offer to my clients is TOS, time of service, which is essentially saying this is a cash patient. We've gotten away from using cash patient because they might not be using cash. Simple, right? So I say TOS. Let me move my screen up a little bit so you can see a little bit better. I'm down here in the notes section. Let's say EMS and ultrasound. So this is just indicating that this patient wants EMS services, ultrasound services, but they have to pay out of pocket for those services. I'm going to star that so it always ends up at the top of the list, and I'm going to add it. Now, when I'm going to go back to my day, and when I hover over, nope, it didn't do it. I think maybe I need to refresh, but we'll go back down here. Sorry, guys. Sometimes when we're using the demo account, it doesn't respond the way I want it to. And my apologies. When you hover over the appointment, you see some things that are in the appointment that can be helpful. There's a first visit in this mark test. We see that Aetna is the insurance company, and then we see the notes of back pain. So if we were to refresh this page, which my concern is I'm going to refresh this page and it's going to just disappear. So I'm not going to do it. But when we look at here and we see the notes section come up and it says back pain, if we had put that TOS, EMS, and ultrasound into the notes section, we would see that clearly here. And the point is that when I, as the provider, am charting for one of these patients and I see, oh, okay, TOS for EMS and ultrasound, I can still chart it. I can still add a chart. I can still say that service was performed. I can put all of the required information into the chart about that code, but I won't include it at the bottom in the update billing codes section. That section is what Jane uses to move the codes to the invoice. So you can still put it above in the chart, in the body of the chart. Let me see if I can actually pull one up real quick. And I do apologize, guys. I should have gotten in here and done this ahead of time. Let's see if it's gonna, that's okay. That's okay. I'm gonna get it. And when we start our next webinar, I'm gonna have a chart open for you so that you can see these sections. I'm sorry, I did not have that ready today. But the point of this section of the education is that you can use the notes section while you're charting for anything that you might need. If you see that the insurance is Medicare, you might know, okay, they really require a lot of this type of information. I want to get really detailed in that information. If you have notes in here that says, okay, this patient pays out of pocket for something, I'm going to include it in the body of the chart, but I'm not going to put it in the billing code section because the front desk is having the patient pay for those out of pocket. Things like that. The point being is that when you're in the day section as a provider, this can be very helpful if you have set those accounts correctly or you're using the notes in a way that can help you with that work. So I have found this to be crucial for clinics that have this type of situation where there are some services that the patient's paying out of pocket and they don't want to send those codes to insurance, but they are using the edit billing codes section to transfer codes to the invoice. So I think in our next webinar, that is going to be where we start is how are the chart notes aiding putting the codes, transferring the codes over to the invoice. That's probably going to be a good place for us to start. So I would just say to, keep an eye on these, perhaps try this workflow in your office and see if that can be helpful. What other notes can you put in, and try not to put too many, right? Because you see too many notes, you have to wade through them. It's not going to be as effective. That's why I like to use that star. I like to be really concise with the information so that the provider gets what they need and they're able to get that chart done efficiently and effectively. So that's my suggestion for using the day view while you're doing your chart notes. Let me just check my notes here and make sure that I've touched on all the things that I wanted to. I guess the only other thing, and again, the next webinar, we're going to start here, so we'll get a little bit more into the weeds with it then. There are situations where a provider might use multiple chart notes for the same date of service. I do have a client that does a separate chart note for therapeutic exercise, and that's fine. They're allowed to do that. That's what they want to do. That's great. They have been taught that all of their codes needs to go on the primary chart note. That way, only those codes are moving to the invoice, because if you have two chart notes for the same date of service, it's only going to allow you to transfer one set of codes to that invoice. It won't take both. So we've just taught them, hey, if you do an extra chart note for therapeutic exercise, just don't use that edit billing code section at the bottom. Just do the chart note, chart everything you've done, but put all of the billing codes in the what we call the primary chart note, where the chiropractic services are being performed. That way we know that all the codes are on the invoice and that we're not missing any in the second chart note. And then my team knows that they need to pull both chart notes to send if the insurance company does require chart notes. Not all do. So that's another situation. There's always a lot of situations, guys. There's lots to consider. So again, like I'd started the webinar today, it's good to remember that all of this information can be considered general in some ways. There are always specific situations that are going to be, there's going to be an exception to this rule, or there's going to be more information that needs to be gathered and responded to, not just using this as, the rule of the law. Okay. Providers have a pay out of pocket. Yes, I got that and I did that, and there we are. Okay, gosh, how are we on time? 10:53. That is amazing. Again, fastest I've been through this. Okay, so we are going to move into questions in just a moment. The next series that we are going to do, again, we're going to kind of start right where we're leaving off with the day section, and I will have chart notes ready for you guys to see, so that we can kind of look at the very beginning of that process for the provider. And then we're going to get into claim submissions. Very exciting. I'm here. What questions can I answer? Obviously, let's be very HIPAA conscious. No detailed information, please. No patient names or anything like that. But what challenges are you seeing in the sections that we've talked about today? And I'll get into the chat and see what we have. And Destin, feel free to step in if you have anything that you would like me to kind of continue. Okay. Oh, yes. Sorry, Destin, real quick. Mary, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. I see. Can you share the link for the task feature? Let's actually look at the task feature. If you are signed into your account, you're going to be up here in the upper corner. I'm the demo owner right now. And my tasks is going to be where you go to assign a task. I can assign a task to myself. I could assign a task to somebody else. I could look at the tasks that I've created. I could look at the tasks that have been completed. So this is a great area. For instance, my clients all use this for corrective claim requests. If they want to send a corrective claim out, they would put the patient's name here, the date of service, the reason for the correction. They would set the due date to today. So I see that, in fact, let's see it, right? Let's see it. Test, add, and then it gives you this little badgy fella. So you are like, hey, I've got a task that I got to complete, and I get in there, I do the task, and then I check that task off. And so it's nice. I can see that that's been completed. And I really like this function, especially for in-house. I think that the task feature can really be used to cut down on the back and forth in emails and things like that. It's a good to-do list. Sometimes if I'm just about to get out of an account, but I'm like, oh, I got to look at this the next time I'm in, I'll just add a task for myself, so it's right there waiting for me when I'm in the account next. Thank you for that question. Okay, Destin, sorry.
No problem. I was just taking a look at some of the questions that were submitted in advance, and it looks like you covered quite a few of them. So I think that we're doing pretty well here. Feel free to take a peek through the Q&A. I see the Jane team has answered all of the questions that were open there. So I'm not sure if you wanted to address any of those in the session. Yeah, so take a look at those. But yeah, if anyone has any other questions they would like answered, feel free to pop them into the chat or the Q&A. And we'll stay on for a few more minutes, but if not, we can start to wind up.
Perfect. Yeah, we don't have a whole lot in there, which is, I mean, great. Hopefully you guys are just doing really well. And this was like, okay, yeah, I know this stuff, and good for you, because this is not easy stuff. Yes, I'm just reading through locations named for each doctor. Be correct way. Okay, so the question posed by Cassandra, I'm just going to read this out loud. We have two physicians who operate as separate entities, essentially. We bill non-assignment for our Medicare patients only. I was told to set up two separate locations in Jane for each doctor so that box 32 of the claim form matches what Medicare has on file. Would the two locations be the correct way? Yeah, I think so. And box 32 is kind of funky, right? Because it has to do with the physical location, but it's not just the address, it's the name of the physical location. So again, always it has to match the contract. If you don't have a contract, then it has to match your NPI too. To answer your question, Cassandra, I think that's absolutely correct. You want to make sure that that box 32 is accurate, especially for Medicare. Medicare is very finicky. And so I think that this is probably the best way to go to make sure that the information for each provider is correct in box 32. Yes. So yeah, not a whole lot of questions today, guys. Anything else that I could address with you in this section? I know it's a bit of a smaller section. I kind of wanted to chop it up a little bit just because the next section we're going to get into, I'm just going to jump into that tab real quick, is going to be this claim submission section. This is a big section. There's a lot of information that we're going to be sharing in this section. So that's why I kind of wanted to get us set up first before we jumped into that. I see another question popping up. Let's see what we've got here. Open. Here we are. How do we bill box 32 for home visits? Julie, that's a great question. There's more that I would need to know to answer this question, because if you are doing home visits in addition to having a brick and mortar, then it could be the difference of changing your place of service. Now, Jane does give you the opportunity to change the place of service in the claim. You can set the settings in such a way that you can make that choice per claim. And again, it kind of depends on the contract with insurance, because some providers have contracts that prohibit home visits. Some are like, home visits are fine, but you need to either use a place of service code that is correct or a modifier that is correct. So there are different situations. Different insurers will do it differently. If you are only doing home visits, you are probably likely still providing some sort of address to the insurance company upon contracting. So you would want to check with them, what do I put here? And likely it would be the business address that you are using for mail to, pay to. But again, that's going to be kind of something that you would want to verify with your insurance company and find out, how do I do this appropriately? Do you want a place of service that's different? Do you want a modifier? They would be able to help you understand how to do that correctly. I hope that answered your question. Okay, Kathy, regarding having the signature on file, is there a way for the CMS 1500 claim form to electronically appear with the intake form so the patient can sign the form electronically? Ooh, I think that's a Jane question. My apologies. I'm going to let the Jane team answer that because that's more of a software question. Great. Okay. Brick and mortar. Great, great, great. Yes, Jane, I will let you take that.
Yeah, someone from the Jane team will pop in there and answer that.
Beautiful. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, great. Okay. Let's see. Great, great, great. Where in the chart notes are the CPT and ICDs inputted? I created a new template recently. Great question. That is something we're going to go over next time, but that is an important question. So I would definitely recommend talking to the Jane team about how to get that. It's going to be at the bottom of the chart note, and there's a link that says edit billing codes. And you click on that and it opens the section below. Now, how that section comes up, I am not entirely sure. Because of my position as a third-party biller, I'm not often in the charts section. So again, I'm going to kind of put that to the Jane team to answer, and they can certainly help you with that. It is such an efficient way of making sure that the codes on your chart notes match the codes that are going to be put onto the claim form. And essentially, that's what insurance always wants. They want your chart notes to match your claim form. If any of you are not fully familiar with that section of the charts, I would definitely recommend talking to the Jane team, getting into the videos, find out how to use that, because that can be so helpful, and so fewer corrections. And there's a way to create a workflow around that we're going to go over. So if you're not familiar, get in there, check it out. It's amazing.